Hello, my name's Juliana, and today we're going to be making chocolate chip cookies. So this recipe is my own that I altered from other recipes. So let's get started. So the first step in any recipe you do, not just cookies, is to preheat your oven because you don't want to waste time waiting for it to heat up. So in this recipe we're going to heat it to 375 degrees. Okay. And then in our mixing process, we always mix the wet ingredients and dry ingredients separately and then combine them later. So I always like to start off with mixing the wet ingredients first. So every cookie recipe has like the same base ingredients. It just differs based on like the flavor of the cookie. So our wet ingredients is going to be 2 sticks of butter or just 1 cup of butter, and make sure your butter is softened. So yeah, my butter is really soft. And then we're gonna cream the butter and our sugar. So we have a half cup of white sugar and a cup of packed brown sugar. And then we're just going to cream those together. If you're doing this without any sort of mixer and just by hand, I recommend using a fork to mush together everything. And then once it's nice and mushed together, you can switch over to a whisk and really like fluff it up. Okay, so I mushed everything together with the fork, and now I switched over to the whisk. And I'm really gonna stir it fast so it gets nice and airy. Okay, so now I whisked it all together and it's all nice and combined. One thing about the whisk that you use, I really don't recommend using like those silicone or rubber whisks because they're not sturdy at all, and when you mix it, it becomes all flimsy. So I really recommend if you have one using like a metal one because it's just a lot easier to use. Okay, so now that we have our wet ingredients, we're going to add in our eggs. And we're going to do this one at a time. I'm going to use the surface of my table to crack the eggs. So that's 1 egg. And after 1 egg, I'm going to mix and then do the same with the second egg. Okay, so now we have both eggs in there and it should be nice and like smooth. And now we're gonna add vanilla, which is a really big part of chocolate chip cookies. In terms of vanilla you use, I know most recipes say vanilla extract, but you can really use imitation vanilla as well, which is usually a lot cheaper and you get more of it. Personally, I don't see like that big of a difference in flavor, so it's really up to you what you want to use. And so we need 2 teaspoons vanilla. I just use the cap as 1 teaspoon. So 1, 2, and then mix. Okay, so now all our wet ingredients are mixed, and in order for this to become an actual dough that we can like shape into a ball, we need to do our dry ingredients. So for our dry ingredients, we have 2 1/4 cups of flour. Then we have a half teaspoon of salt. And I always just put a bit less because I don't like my cookies to be too salty. And then 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And if you've ever seen, like if you use the box of baking soda, usually it has you open it from the side and there's like a tab here. That tab is meant to like flatten out after you measure out however much you need. So get a lot and then the tab just like that, so you have exactly a teaspoon of baking soda. And then mix it all together. now both parts of our ingredients are mixed, and we're going to add our dry to our wet. So I just like to do this a bit at a time so it's easier to mix. You could do it all at once, but it's just going to be harder. So I just do a few parts at a time until all my dry ingredients are incorporated. Okay, so I added in all my dry ingredients, and I actually switched over to a spatula because you'll see that it, even in parts, it gets hard to mix at the end. And it just becomes easier to mix with a spatula. And compared to the oatmeal chocolate chip cookie recipe, the batter by itself is much thicker, and that's because you're not adding in as many inclusions. But that one you have like 3 different things. This one you just have chocolate chips. So now is the time that we're gonna add in the chocolate chips, and then just fold it in. Now that we've mixed our dough and mixed in the chocolate chips, we have a very nice dough here. And now it's time to scoop out the dough. So I just used like these pan sheets or baking sheets, and you can line them with like these silicone baking mats or parchment paper. Those are my ideal ones that I like to use. Or you could use foil and just spray it. That works too. So in terms of how to scoop it, I like to use a scooper just because it's like easier. But you could use a spoon or even your hands. Just make sure they're clean. So yeah, let's get started. If you're using like a smaller scooper like I am, don't be so like meticulous with how well it fits the size. I just go like a bit larger than the actual scoop, and like a cookie that size is pretty good. So now I'm just gonna scoop out the rest, and I'll see you when it's time to bake. Okay, so now I finished scooping out all my cookies, as you can see. And one thing I really like to do before baking the cookies, but it's not necessary, is to just refrigerate them for like 10 minutes so that way they firm up and they don't spread out as much when they're baking. So I'm just going to do that for like 10 minutes and then put them in the oven. So while I was gone, I went ahead and put them in the oven, and I baked them for very short, probably like 12 minutes. And you'll notice like some racks will bake differently than others, and that's what happened with me as well. So that's why if you can, switch around the racks so that they can bake as evenly as possible. So now if you have a cooling rack, this would be a great time to use it. So we're going to transfer our cookies from the hot pan to the cooling rack. And if you have cookies that are stuck together, just take your spatula and just like divide it. So now I'm just gonna transfer all these. And be careful when you're doing this because they're still very soft. So there's a chance that they may break. So just be very careful with it. Another thing I forgot to mention is that while they're in the oven, or like when you're gonna take them out, they may seem really puffed. But that's normal because once you take them out to cool, you're going to notice they're going to sink in. So that's completely normal. And now once I got them on the cooling rack and they're nice and cooled, you can see that they're much harder and they don't fall apart when you touch them. So that's great. Okay, so now our cookies are nice and cooled, and the best part, it's time to eat it. I really like to eat this with milk because that's my favorite way to eat them. So I hope you enjoyed making chocolate chip cookies, and I'll see you next time. Bye.